All right, we're going to get started. This is a Spring developer's guide to navigating the front-end landscape. My name is Dan Vega. I'll tell you a little bit more about me in a minute. There's a QR code for a lot of the code that we're going to go through today. There's a GitHub repo with a bunch of different repos in, or a GitHub organization with a bunch of different repos in it. So I want a quick show of hands. How many people think that the world of front-end development moves too fast, can be very confusing, and has way too many projects to keep up with? If you didn't raise your hand, there's really something wrong with you, because there is a lot going on in the front-end space, right? So my hope with this is to really kind of distill some of that down and give you some options as a Spring developer to kind of create that next front end for your back-end project. Okay, so I want to start with this. We all kind of get into this industry for different reasons, right? Some of you might have had an interest in computer programming. Maybe you saw a lucrative career, nothing wrong with that. But I think early on, we try to find something that really inspires us, right? Something that we can be passionate about. It doesn't need to be your complete life, but it needs to be something that kind of sparks an interest. And if you're lucky enough to do that throughout your career, you should consider that a big win. And for me, since day one, has always kind of been building for the web. That ability to back in my day, again, this is 23, 25 years ago, being able to write some HTML and FTP it up to a server and have it live to the world. It's just always something about that, something real about that. So I've loved absolutely building for the web. I've been doing it my whole career. Not something I haven't been really great with, but something that I've always been interested in getting better at. When I started, it looked a little bit different. Maybe not as long as dinosaurs has roamed the earth, but I use tools like FrontPage and Dreamweaver and put something on the screen and drag it around and see what kind of code that it wrote, which always wasn't a great thing because it never wrote great code, but I was just trying to see how you can write code that way. And then ultimately, I would try to get it to work in something like IE6, which was never a fun thing, right? So I've always had an interest in this. It's never something I was never great at, but I really enjoyed the aesthetics of a good-looking website, right? I wanted to get better at it, and it still kind of drives me today. And I think one thing I'll kind of hope you get out of this is that if that's something you're interested in too, if you just want to build a basic front end for your Spring app, fine. But if it's something that you're really interested in and getting better at, just as anything else, you really got to put the reps in. You have to find reasons to work on some of these front-end projects, right? So I started a nonprofit in Cleveland, so I had time to work on that app. I had a friend when I was younger start his own business, and I kind of built that website. I've had blogs over the years. This was my very first blog. I was an org because there was no, the .com was taken, so I took an org. That was a really strange logo. I don't know what I was doing, but yeah, so this is back in 2005, and over time it starts to evolve a little, gets a little bit better, right? That seems to look a little bit better. Anybody remember Flickr? Is that still around? I don't think so. And then we kind of go into this, and again, I was just working on things. This was a couple iterations ago. Again, something like that curve, just being able to I saw that on a website, and I was like, oh, I want to know how to do that. And so finding little things like that to just kind of keep learning from and kind of building those reps, right? This is the current iteration of my blog. It's based on Vue and Tailwind, and I'm a big fan of this one. So what I want to say about that is, does the front end change a lot? Yes, it does, but so do we. And we can keep up on some of this as long as we have just a few different things that we could focus on instead of trying to read Twitter and find out all the things that are going on in that space, right? So a little bit about me, husband and a father, my wife Jen, our two daughters, Isabella and Juliana. Thank God they look like her mother. Oh, they're beautiful. We live outside of Cleveland. I am a Java champion. Again, I put that dinosaur picture up there earlier. I'm a Spring developer advocate. I love creating content. I'm still on the Bird app at The Real Dan Vega. I mentioned this yesterday, but if you don't know about Spring Ops Hours, this is a good resource to kind of get caught up on all the things in the Spring ecosystem. We do a live stream Monday, usually 1 to 2 Eastern. We'll have a replay of that, and then we turn this into a podcast, so you can kind of get it wherever you get your podcasts. So it's our job to kind of keep you up to date with things that are going on and hopefully answer some questions. Okay, enough of that. Let's get to this. I want to talk about a high level of some of these things. So I want to talk about Java frameworks. We'll start with Spring MVC. This is a Spring conference. I hope we've at least heard of Spring MVC, but we'll take a look at an example of that and where you might want to reach for that. I want to take a look at a framework, component framework called Vaadin, and kind of get that on your radar if you haven't seen that before. This is a way to write front-end applications in pure Java. So you don't need to know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, right? We can use our existing Java skills to write front ends. Then we'll kind of jump into the JavaScript libraries and frameworks. So this is kind of where a lot of the change is happening, right? We'll spend some time with like package managers and talk about those, look at JavaScript frameworks and really how does that fit into building Spring apps. We'll look at something new called HTMX, kind of new. It's exciting. It's a way to kind of add dynamic capabilities to your applications without writing JavaScript. So if you're one of those people who see JavaScript and scream and don't want to write it, this could be something for you. And then we'll kind of round this up by like, okay, that's a lot of great options, but how do I choose which one I use next? All right, so how can we leverage our existing Java skills to build UI? So in the Java space, we have some options. We'll look at Spring MVC, we'll look at Vaadin. From the company Vaadin, they have a couple of different products. One is Vaadin Flow that we'll look at. The other is Hilla, and that kind of combines Spring Boot and React together. Similarly, JHipster is a project out there that kind of puts all of this together. And I remember a long time ago, JHipster, I mean, this was probably 10 years ago, right when Spring Boot came out. I think JHipster's been around that long. I would look at code that they were making to be able to create these front-end stacks and like see how these like different moving parts and pieces got put together. We're not going to look at JavaFX today, but if you want to build kind of desktop or client applications, that's a really good option. Struts is still out there being maintained. I saw it was, it's been recently updated. I started with Struts 20-some years ago, and Java server faces. So these are kind of the Java frameworks, and we'll look at two of those today. So let's start with Spring MVC. Again, we are at a Spring conference. We should mention this. Again, I'm guessing most people will use it, but if you haven't, let's kind of talk about it quickly. So Spring MVC, the original web framework built on the Servlet API, it's been around since the beginning, right? It kind of gives us this model view controller separation based on the dispatcher servlet. And we can use different, so first off, we don't need any template engines. If we wanted to just create a web app that used static HTML files, we wouldn't need to bring in kind of any template engines. We could just have like an index.html file with some regular HTML in there. We can route to that, we can display that, things are good to go. Where template engines come in is when we want to start doing some of these, we want to be able to provide attributes to those templates. So we have a list of sessions in our example today. We get those from the database and we want to push those down into a template and have some template that could then iterate over those and display those. So there are different template engines available. If you go look at the Spring Initializer and start typing in template, you'll see those, Thymeleaf, Apache FreeMarker, Mustache, Groovy templates. But those aren't the only ones. There are some other ones out there that you can use. I know some people are really big fans of something called JTE. So that is something maybe you could put on your radar too to take a look at. But what I'm going to take a look at today is Thymeleaf, because I'm a big fan of this because one of Thymeleaf's goals is to kind of bring natural templates to your workflow. And what does that mean? So everybody remember the days of like JSPs where you had these like all this like Java included in there to kind of render out some data. You couldn't hand that over to a designer or somebody who's better with HTML than us and be able to like say, hey, can you work on this for me? Can you make it look nice? Because there's all this Java included. With Thymeleaf, even though we are using some tags in there to do things like iterate over a collection, they are natural templates. So you can hand them off to a designer. They can do some work with it, even though there's those things going on in there, and they can give it back to you. So I'm a big fan of that. So let's take a look at a quick demo of Spring MVC. Make that a little bigger. should be good. Okay, so we are in here. We are using Java 21. Again, I just went to the Spring Initializer. I picked web. I picked my template. In this case, it's Thymeleaf. I'm using the dev tools, so if we wanted to get some automatic reloads, we could, and that's all there is to that. So I have a list of session data. So these are the sessions that were being played here in the Spring Theater, and I just have a title and the speakers. And what I want to do is make a little layout or interface for this to kind of display all of these sessions. So I have this session repository. It's going to, this is what reads from the JSON file. It'll put them into a collection so I can use that in my controller. So I have a session controller here and I have nothing going on. So in Spring MVC, we are basically using the @controller annotation to say, hey, this is where we are going to take requests in, and then we need to like display them somehow. So I'm going to create a get mapping just to our root here. And what this is going to return is a string. And what we want to do is we want to define the template that we're going to use. So in this case, it's just going to be index. So I also want the ability to get all of the sessions out of that file and send them down to that template so we can display them. So we can do that using the model. I can say model.add attribute. This is going to be called sessions, and we'll get that through the repositories find all method, right? So now that we have that, we need to create this template. So by convention, these are located under source main resources and templates. So I can come in here and just create a new file, call this index.html. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and add some so we don't have to watch me type because that's a lot of typing. And I'll just talk through this real quick. So this is Thymeleaf. It starts with the directive. So this TH is kind of the namespace that we'll use when we use those different directives in Thymeleaf. I am including a CDN of Tailwind. Don't do this in production. This is just kind of a demo thing. If you're interested in kind of better ways to use Tailwind in your Spring apps, I have some videos on YouTube about that. But I have a title here. So SpringOne sessions. And we'll just go ahead. We have some Tailwind classes in here. But down here, we're using Thymeleaf, the TH directive, to say, for each one of those sessions, I want to go ahead and iterate over that. And I want to display the title and the speakers. And again, this session was made available in the controller as we put it into the model, and that model is now passed down to the template, regardless of what template we're using. We could use one of those other template engines if we wanted to, right? So let's go ahead and try and run this. And what I should be able to do is go to localhost 8080. So let's do that, 8080. And there's our list of sessions. We have the title and we have the speakers. So for me, again, if I didn't want to use any of this dynamic behavior, I didn't even need Thymeleaf. I could just use some regular HTML. But if I want to bring in some of this, the ability to push some of this data down into those templates, I could bring in something like Thymeleaf. Okay, so that's demo number one. Let's keep moving. No, not done. There we go. All right, so a really good example of this, we've been talking about it all week, right, is the Pet Clinic. If you go look at the Pet Clinic and want to look at something that is a Spring MVC app using something like Thymeleaf, there's a really good example of it. So check that out. Okay, I want to talk about Vaadin. So Vaadin, I mentioned Spring Office Hours earlier. We did an interview with one of the developer advocates there, Lawrence Lockhart, who is just a really good person. And he kind of broke down like Vaadin is the company, and then there are different products out there, right? So they have Vaadin Flow, they have Hilla, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So you can learn more at vaadin.com. The requirements are for this JDK 17, but that's okay. We're all building Spring Boot 3 apps now anyway, right? So we're on JDK 17 at least. And if you go over there, you can, really nice website. I said I liked Lawrence, but I really like Vaadin as a company, just everybody that works there, the products that they work on. If you go there, there's a quick getting started. You can go through some documentation. But what I really love about this is if we have a team of existing Java developers who don't have any HTML, CSS, JavaScript skills, or just not good at it, or just don't enjoy it, they much rather write some Java, this is a good framework for them to use. It's really great for back office applications. So if we're just writing some CRUD app that we need something stood up for. Again, I think one of the things that always hindered me early on was like, yeah, I want to write this like CRUD app, but I also want it to look kind of nice. And I don't want to spend all this time trying to figure out how to make it look nice. Well, Vaadin comes with a bunch of like really great components, so we don't have to worry about any of that. Okay, so the components I just talked about, they're built on customizable themes, so you can change things like colors, roundness, fonts, etc. What I really love is these components are tested to ensure good accessibility, which is usually an afterthought, unfortunately. I really like that they kind of put that right into the framework here so that they're available on things like screen readers. Again, Vaadin has two full stack frameworks. One is Hilla, one is Vaadin Flow. We're going to talk about Vaadin Flow. So if you go into their docs, you can see all of their UI components. And by the way, this is all kind of free and open source, which is really great. They do have some commercial products on top of it, but what we're talking about is free. So you go in there, you can grab some layouts. So I need a particular layout for this application. Again, once you go into those layouts, you can do things like style them. There's even Figma libraries. So if you have some designers and they have Figma libraries, you can use, they can put those apps together with that. Something I saw was either Lawrence, I think it was Marcus, one of the other developer advocates for. He basically gave the design team the Figma libraries. They put together what they wanted this app to look like. And then he's like, well, I don't want to write this code. And it seems like the LLMs all understand what Vaadin is at this point. So he pasted in the Figma designs and said, write this code in Vaadin for me. And it gave him a really, really good start. So like you can even do something like that when there's frameworks out there like this. So you can go in there and take a look at all the components. There's things like date pickers and tables. We're going to take a look at a table today, but basically all the components you'd expect with some type of UI library. So from the home page, you can click that create new app. It'll send you into this. They have like a starter, kind of like start.spring.io, right? You can start a new project. It has those by default. It's using Vaadin Flow, Java, Maven, and Spring Boot. You can, of course, edit that and change that up. You can also do this from the Spring Initializer. Here I'm saying this is a web project. I'm using Vaadin. I'm using the Spring Boot web dev tools and the Spring Boot actuator. So let's take a quick look at this one. So let's make sure this is stopped. Recent projects. Where are we? There we are. Okay, so similar project. We have the session data from this conference here. We have a repository that reads from it. Oh, sorry. There we go. I have a record that just defines a single session that has a title and a list of speakers. Let's go into session view. Oh, I didn't want this. Hold on, let's start without this so it's not as confusing. So I'm going to start with just a class. So normally when we were doing something with Spring MVC, right, we created a class and we marked it with @controller. When we're using Vaadin here, we're going to mark it with @route. This is what's coming from Vaadin, and this is how it knows how to define those routes in your system. So if you wanted that to be /sessions or something else, you can come in here and set that. But I'm just going to have this at the root. So then you go in, and again, this is all in the documentation, but you go in and you need to basically create a view, and you can do that by extending one of the layouts. So there's like a vertical layout, a horizontal layout. There's like a generic div layout. But again, there were some of those different layouts in there in the documentation that you can go in and just kind of copy that code to paste something in here to kind of see what's going on. Okay, so now that we have that, whoops. Copilot's doing its thing. Let's turn you off. You're not fun for demos. All right, let's see. Okay, so now I'm gonna do a couple more things. So I'm just kind of changing how I want the layout to look. So I'm setting the size to full. I come in here, I create a new title using the H1 component. Again, these are all kind of building blocks for our layouts. But again, you can see this is Java code. We're not writing HTML, right? So I create a title, I create a grid. You can do some really cool things with their grid. So one thing I'm saying here is here's like the header for this. Here's the header for speakers. And then you can add some variants. I want it like nice and compact. And then you can go ahead and add sessions to that grid. So I go out to the repository, get all my sessions, add it to the grid. Finally, we just set some things to kind of tweak the layout a little. We create a new layout to add the title and then the grid under it. So that's a vertical layout. And then we add that one to the container. So if we go ahead and run this, and rerun this, that's a little bit different, but this is that table right from Vaadin. We didn't have to write that HTML file. We didn't have to write, HTML, CSS, and we can kind of tweak this as we need. All right, now let's move into the world of JavaScript. So as I mentioned earlier, things are rapidly changing in this space, a lot. But I want to focus on a couple of things, which are like package managers, build tools, JavaScript runtimes, frameworks. So let's talk about package managers, build tools, and runtimes. Oh my. I want to start with package managers. Package manager is a system that will manage your project dependencies. We're used to this in the Java world with something like Maven or Gradle. And then the package manager will provide a method to install new dependencies, which are referred to as packages, manages where packages are stored on your computer, and offer capabilities to publish these packages out to the web. So these are some big ones out there. You've probably heard of NPM. Maybe you've heard of PNPM, but wasn't quite sure what that is. So one of the things with NPM, the joke is you install the entire internet when you run the project and install like a node modules folder. PNPM does this, but they install all the node modules in a central location. So you're not doing that on every single project, right? I remember back in the day there was a script that you could run out there to take a look at your whole computer and find every node module folder and delete that and find out that you just saved like 20 gigs of data on your machine. So yeah, PNP stands for Performance NPM. There's Yarn, there's JSR, which is a new one. This is a superset of NPM, similar to how TypeScript is kind of a superset of JavaScript. JSR is out there. So we'll talk about node package managers. That's kind of the biggest one. This really consists of three different things, right? There is the website where you can go out there and look for different packages, similar to Maven Central. There's the CLI, so when you run NPM on your command line, this is how most developers kind of interact with NPM. And then there's a registry. There's a large database of software out there and meta information surrounding it. To publish and install packages to and from NPM registries or even private ones, you must install Node.js and the NPM command line interface using either something like a Node version manager or a Node installer. If you aren't aware, there's something called NVM. This will allow you to manage multiple versions of Node at the same time, similar to how we use SDKman for something like Java or Spring. NVM is something that I would really recommend checking out if you're going to get into this world. So then build tools. Before ES modules were available in browsers, we had no mechanism for authoring JavaScript in kind of a modularized fashion, right? This is why we're all kind of familiar with, or at least we've heard of, the concept of bundling, right? Using these tools to like crawl, process, concatenate, and source modules into files that can be run in the browser. So we had things like Webpack and Parcel and Rollup, but as our projects got to be bigger and bigger and bigger in the enterprise space, we started having a lot more complexity, right? And it wasn't uncommon for these large-scale projects to have thousands of modules. And we started to hit performance bottlenecks with this. Sometimes it could even take up to unreasonably long times for a dev server to start up, minutes. So I've been on some Webpack project before where it was like 45 seconds to 2 minutes just to start up a dev server. And I'm a Java developer. I've been through long compilations, but I'm not a big fan of sitting there and waiting that long for something like that to happen, right? So there's been a lot of really great advancements in this area over the past few years, one of which is a really good tool called ES-Build. This is written in Go. It's an extremely fast builder for the web, but it's used in many build tools around different ecosystems. So you can see by some numbers there, vastly, way faster than something like Webpack 5. So I'm going to talk to you about another tool that I really love called Vite. Vite is actually built based off of ES-Build. It was created by the team who built Vue, but it's not just for Vue. It supports many other frameworks, including something like Vanilla.js, and Vite pre-bundles dependencies using ES-Build. It's a dev server that provides a bunch of really rich feature enhancements over native ES modules. You also get this hot module replacement, which is really nice. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun to work with. So we'll take a look at Vite in a second. But then we know JavaScript can also run in the browser, right? But there are some also runtimes out there. We've probably heard it Node at this point. There's also Dino. So Dino is created by the author of Node. If you look at Dino, you can kind of spell Node out of it, right? So he found that there are a lot of things that he wished he would have done with Node, and so he kind of started from the ground up with Dino. Bun's another one. I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I hear great things about it. It's a fast JavaScript all-in-one toolkit, meaning you get a runtime, a package manager, a bundler, a test runner. So those are 3 runtimes that you can look at. Okay. Let's do a demo. I want to talk about Vite real quick. So let's do this. And what I'm going to do is I have a command line open here, and I'm going to run npm create Vite at latest, right? So I'm creating Vite at latest, and we're going to give it a project name. So I'm going to say front end. And as we do this, we got to do something. I probably have something in here. Okay, let's say front end. And you can see now we get dropped into, and we have a bunch of different options here. So we can create a Vanilla.js project, Vue, React, Preact. There's also other ones out in the community. I know there's a plugin for this for like Angular development. So if you want to use Vite with Angular, you can. But I'm just going to create a simple vanilla JavaScript project. So now I can go into my front end directory. I'll go ahead and open this up in IntelliJ. We'll take a look at this. Let me do this first. All right. So what this gives you is a nice, simple vanilla JavaScript project, but it also puts things together in a nice project structure for you. So first you get your package.json. If you're unfamiliar with this, this is kind of like the entry point. It defines what this project is. It also has some scripts. So when you run npm run whatever, that is based on these scripts. So npm run dev will basically run Vite for you. And we have a build and we have a preview. We have this index.html. So it gives you a nice little project scaffold out. We're using ES modules here. We can see the type is module. And then we pull in this main JavaScript. So I'm going to go ahead and replace this with something else. Let's just say this. This is just going to be a front end for Dan GPT, a little front end interface to kind of a chat GPT style thing. And then what we'll do in the JavaScript here is I'll replace this with something else as well. And all this is going to do is go out to localhost 8080 and hit an endpoint. And we'll go ahead and open that project up right now and make sure that backend is started. So this is the backend for my Spring app, and I want this vanilla HTML JavaScript project to go ahead and talk to it. So we'll open this up, and I'll go ahead and there we go. And let's run that. So once that backend is up and running, now we can, again, I said package.json, we can run npm run dev to get our front end up and running. So I'll do that here. We did not npm install anything. So let's do that real quick. And this is going to be especially slower on network Wi-Fi because, again, we are downloading a bunch of things, but much better than other kind of frameworks that I've seen. Again, Vite is kind of, there's not a lot there, so this should go much faster locally for you. So let's go npm run dev, and I have something running on localhost 5174. So you can see I have this kind of chat GPT interface. I can go in and say, tell me a joke about dogs. Here's a dog joke for you. Why did the dog sit in the shade? Because he didn't want to be a hot dog. So that is the Spring AI app. That's my Spring backend talking to something like OpenAI and just sending that along and then getting the response. So kind of my point there is we can use tools like Vite to kind of kick off a front-end project if you want to have two separate projects, if you want to kind of separate the front end from the back end. Later, we'll go into an example of kind of a full stack Vue project with Spring Boot. Okay, let's go. Right? Yep. Okay, so JavaScript frameworks. We've heard about them. There's a lot of them out there. It's hard to keep up with them, right? Frameworks are really designed to make the development process easier and more standardized, allowing developers to kind of focus on functionality and features of their application instead of the infrastructure, right? Sounds familiar, kind of what Spring does for us on the back end. So let's talk about some of those features. One of the ones I really appreciate is kind of that component-based architecture. So a lot of the modern frameworks out there like React and Vue allow us to create components and make them reusable, allowing us to kind of write more reusable modular pieces of our UI. State management. This is not something I would suggest trying to figure out on your own. A lot of the different frameworks or libraries out there have different state management out there. It depends which area you're in. So something like React developers get very angry with you if you call it a framework. I always end up calling it a framework, and then I get told it's not a framework, it's a library. But something like React is very unopinionated and has a lot of different options for something like state management, where something like Vue is very opinionated and has, this is the state management library. I think there's two main ones that are used in the Vue community. So that's something to think about as well. You also want to try to figure out routing. You don't want to write all these different routes by yourself. Things like data binding, templating, performance optimization. This is really why we kind of reach for something like a JavaScript framework. So here's kind of the big ones. I'm sure we've all heard of these. There's more out there. These are kind of the ones that I'd like to focus on. I started with, it's funny, I worked for a coding boot camp, and we were trying to figure out which component JavaScript framework we were going to teach to somebody who just got into the program, just got into coding. And we ended up going with Vue. And I am a big fan of Vue, but I'm not saying it's better than any other one. But the reason we did that is because Angular is based on TypeScript. And so these developers just learned JavaScript. Trying to teach them TypeScript was not going to happen as well in that short amount of time. React, if you've ever seen HTML or JSX HTML inside of JavaScript, it would blow your mind if you just got into writing HTML, right? So we kind of settled on Vue. I've been a big fan of Vue, but these are all really great JavaScript frameworks. I know Angular is used a lot in the enterprise, but these are some ones that you can kind of focus on. But what I want to do is basically take a look at two examples of using a JavaScript framework. And this really will depend on the requirements of your project, right? So we'll look at an example where we have a Vue app that is standalone Vue app, and we have a Spring app, and we need to talk from the Vue app to the Spring app. And then we'll take a look at an example that is basically a monolithic app. It has the Vue front end, the Spring back end, all in one artifact that we can deploy to production. All right, let's close that one and that one. New sessions. Okay, so this is my Vue app Now I'm not going to run this, but this should start to look pretty familiar. I use Vite for this as well. Instead of picking vanilla JavaScript, I just pick Vue. See, there's a few more files, but the kind of layout is the same. I have this package.json because I'm in like a, one thing I didn't mention before too is even in that vanilla JavaScript project, what I really enjoyed about that project structure is like, well, why are you doing this? Why do you have this project structure if you're only using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? And I kind of liken it to the same way I approach a Java project. Just because I can use Java without a build tool doesn't mean I ever would, right? I'm always going to start with Maven or Gradle because eventually I'm going to have some dependency on something, even if it's something as simple as JUnit, right? So I like starting with these well-defined project structures. So I have Vue in here. Inside the source folder, I have this app.vue. And inside of here, we're just using the fetch API to make a call to /API/sessions. We go ahead and look at, we display some HTML here. And another big thing I'm a big fan of Vue for is you kind of have everything in a single component. So we have script, we have HTML, and we have CSS here. So once I get those from the backend, the separate Spring Boot app backend, I will go ahead and iterate over those similarly to how we did in a Spring MVC world, right? And output those. So again, I'm not going to run this because I want to show the other one. This is this one. So now what I want is I wanted to put everything in the same project. So maybe I'm a solo developer and I don't want to deal with like deploying two different applications. Maybe that's okay for the requirements for this project. So I have a normal Spring Boot app, so source main Java. I have my Spring application in here. But what I did is I go into the source folder and I use Vite to basically create a new project in there in a front-end folder. So now I have my front-end project inside my project here, and I have my Spring Boot project. So now remember how we started this project earlier? We had to run npm run dev to kick up the front end. Well, we have to like start the back end too. And so that might be a bit of a pain to do in a single project every single time. There are some things that you can do to make this easier. One of which is you can throw a quick script together. You can just say, hey, MVN, we're using Maven, Spring Boot run, sleep for a second or two or 5, and then run npm run dev with the prefix. And here is the folder for that front-end application. And then, go ahead and open this up in localhost 5173. So let's go ahead and run that. And then it'll open, and there's our application. So it really doesn't do much, but our front end, if we look at source app.js or app.vue, we can see that this is bringing in our hello world component, and it just goes out to our API, returns our response, and then sets the message. So we're setting the message to hello world. So this is great for development, but what happens when we need to go to production? We have these two kind of assets in there, right? A front end and a back end. We need to basically run npm run build and build the front end so that it has a production ready artifact for the front end. And then we need to run a normal process on the back end to build our Spring Boot app. So one way that we can solve for this, I have a couple of Maven plugins in here. So the first one is this front end Maven plugin. And the first thing it will do is install Node in npm. So we set some versions in here to make sure we're on the correct ones. We generate some resources, we run install, and then we build. And this is building that kind of front-end artifact. Here's our working directory. The second piece to this is now that we have a build of the front end, we want to copy the front-end resources. So I want to copy everything from target, from source front-end dist to target classes static. So that will copy the builds into that static folder, because remember, in a Spring Boot app, anything that is in that static folder can be run. So if you just have an index.html file in there, that can be that will get executed. So what we can do here now is we can just go over to a terminal, And let's see if we can Maven clean install. What is going on here? Oh, that's this one. So let's do -9 3-1. All right. Maven clean install. So what this is going to do is basically create a jar file in this case. It'll create that executable jar. It's in the target folder. So now I can just run this with java-jar, target, what's in there, full. So now this will start up. And if we go here and rerun, actually this will be at localhost 8080. There's our Spring Boot app with our front end kind of put together in a single artifact that we can deploy to production. Cool. Let me jump into one more thing real quick. Okay, HTMX. This is something really cool. We had a chance to look at some JavaScript frameworks, but I want to take a look at a library that has basically a different approach to this. And we can use HTMX to add attributes, basically add some dynamic capabilities without having to write JavaScript. So when I started writing code, we followed a simple pattern, right? You pick any kind of server-side technology according to your primary programming language, and within each stack, a dozen of these frameworks existed, right? So we have this template language to kind of enrich the HTML documents, but a consequence of this is that every single time we ask the server for something, we would do a full round trip and we get a full payload of data back, right? So we're rendering the full page again. Then what happened, jQuery came onto the scene and said, okay, let's like add some dynamic capabilities by maybe we just make an AJAX request and just pull some of this data back instead of doing that full page rendering. Well, that's kind of what we're doing here with HTMX. It's a library that allows you to get access to modern browsing features rather than with just HTML without using JavaScript. It's very small, dependency-free, extendable. What I really love about this is that they compared it to like a React framework project, and it was like 70% less code to do some of the same capabilities. I'll quickly go some of the features. You can check out the documentation. I want to walk through an example, so we'll jump through this because I'm running out of time. I did want to mention this though. New in Spring Framework 6.2 is the ability to support multiple fragments. I've done a video on this. So especially in HTMX, when we're rendering just fragments, we want to ask the server for just a piece of HTML, update this sidebar, update this island over here. Before this, you can only return one fragment. Now we have the ability to support multiple fragments. Also, there's a really good library out there called HTMX by Wim de Blauw, and that is now on the initializer as of just like last week. So you can pull that in. And that just gives you some helper functions for working with HTMX. So I just want to show this off real quick and then we'll close up. Where is our... So in this scenario, we have a chat controller here. I have this public string home. So similar to our Spring MVC, right? We're saying, here's home. That is going to render this index HTML. On the index HTML template, though, I had that sidebar where I have the list of chat responses, and then I have a text input in the middle where we can talk to an LLM. Instead of writing the JavaScript to kind of hook up to that input, right on that form, I can say, hey, when somebody posts this form, we're going to hit an API endpoint called /generate. And what I want you to do is when that HTML is returned to me, I want you to do some, I want to swap it out. So there are different swaps. I can swap in the inner HTML, the outer HTML, the parent, the child. There are a bunch of different ways to do that. But here's the target for that HTML that comes back. So we're not going and asking the server for a full page re-render. We're just saying, go get that little piece of snippet. And that little piece of snippet in this case is broken up into two fragments. The response of the LLM and then that sidebar that kind of displays today's messages. So let me run this application real quick. And let's go to localhost 8080. And so what we'll do here is say, tell me a dad joke about cats. And so now what it's going to do is it does two things. It replaces that response, takes the response from the server, inserts it here into the response container. And then it also takes the response and it updates this list on the side with something that we asked it. Tell me a joke about Las Vegas. I didn't test this one. It might get weird. Did I not enter? Oh, whatever. Demo gods. But that's kind of HTMX. Being able to like do these dynamic things that we would normally use something like JavaScript for, just by adding little attributes in HTML. So I'll close out real quick. Which one should I choose? It really depends, right? It depends on the requirements of our project. Some things you can consider: are you a solo developer or are you a team? If you have teams and you have different responsibilities, like I have a front-end team and I have a back-end team, that may make it easier. Is this a greenfield project or an existing one? What is the architecture of the project? Developer skill set is a big one. Why make everyone move over to Vue if we have all of our skills in-house are Java developers? What is it, a back office application that we can just use something like Vaadin for? Is it a customer-facing application? Is SEO important? These are all things we need to consider. So there's not one right answer, but hopefully today I've kind of given you some of the options that are out there. So with that, I'll take some questions. No? Oh, yep. Oh, I got one. Hello?
My voice doesn't travel, so I need a mic. So in terms of performance, though, which one, is there one better than the other? In terms of like even on the Vue side or?
No, I mean, because again, like even in the example of the Vue front end and the Spring Boot back end, right? I guess it depends on how you deploy those applications. So if I deploy one on the other side of the world and this one over here and there's latency between, like that could be a performance issue, right? But if they're both deployed in the same data center, I don't think that's going to be a big issue. So no, I think you can get good performance out of any of these solutions.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, everybody's ready to get out for the day? Be done? All right, thanks for coming, everyone. Appreciate it.